A Farewell to Mars by Zahnd. Chapter 5. Freedom's just another word for... On Sunday, September 10th, 2006, I was a guest speaker at a church in another state. It was the day before the 5th anniversary of 9/11. As part of the worship service, the church played a video with Lee Greenwood's patriotic anthem, God Bless the USA, as the soundtrack. In part, the lyrics say, I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. The video that accompanied this song consisted entirely of images of American military might, tanks, fighter jets, aircraft carriers, missiles being fired, soldiers with their weapons, and the like. During the familiar, emotive chorus, the congregation began to sing along, with most lifting their hands in a posture of worship. I was dumbfounded. In a Midwestern American church, Christians were worshiping before icons of war and singing a hymn about how proud they were to be Americans, to be free. What was going on? Was this a mashup of Mars and Jesus? It was weird. It was worship. It was wrong. And as far as I could tell, no one there sensed anything incongruent with replacing the cross with an M1 tank and worshiping American military might while singing about a particular version of freedom. After the enthusiastic applause for God Bless the USA, I was introduced and made my way to the pulpit. I lacked the courage to, or had the good sense not to, suggest to the congregation that what they had just done was idolatrous. There's no way they would have understood that. And they're good people. They love Jesus. They believe the Bible. They're exemplary citizens. But they also have some confused ideas about what it means to be Christian and what Jesus meant when he talked about freedom. And it's not the first time would-be disciples of Jesus have been confused about freedom. After all, freedom's just another word for what? Jesus famously said, you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. John 8:32. Great, but what does that mean? Most people seem to think that Jesus just dropped that platitude on us out of nowhere and without any particular context, as if it were purely a standalone proverb. Taken out of its particular context, the truth will set you free can mean almost anything. In other words, it collapses into cliche. That's the problem with bumper sticker approach. That's the problem with the bumper sticker approach to the Bible. Preaching devolves into sloganeering. Without proper context, we end up with empty cliche, nice-sounding bits of nothing. Nothing is truer than Jesus saves, but divorced from any real context, it's little more than Christian graffiti. So if someone says, the truth will set you free from drug addiction or whatever, I can't completely agree. But I hasten to add that it's not what Jesus was talking about in John 8. Jesus was actually talking about being set free from a particular enslavement. But we haven't seen this. We just pick out the truth will set you free, carve it on a library, and carry on. Christ tamed to cliche. Truth made generic. Jesus dispensing platitudes. It wasn't until I spent 7 months reading John 8 aloud on my knees every day that I began to comprehend that what Jesus was saying was deeply subversive, truly liberating, and a million miles away from empty cliche. The first thing we need to notice about John 8 is that it is bracketed by 2 attempted stonings. This is significant. The chapter opens with the Pharisees wanting to stone an adulterous woman and closes with the crowd attempting to stone Jesus. In John 8, it's like Bob Dylan said, everybody must get stoned. But why the bookends of attempted stonings? The ancient practice of stoning people to death provides an important context for what Jesus has to say in this chapter. So let's consider stoning. As the Pharisees pointed out, the Torah did prescribe stoning for certain cases of adultery. See Deuteronomy 22:13-24. Stoning was also the means of execution for other violations of the Torah, including blasphemy, witchcraft, Sabbath breaking, and rebellion against parents. That Jesus refused to endorse the barbaric practice of capital punishment is highly significant, but not my main point. The Pharisees could rightly say, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women, John 8:5. But my question is simply this: why stoning? There are certainly more efficient ways of executing a person than by a group of people throwing rocks at the condemned. If there is anything we humans have proven ourselves to be efficient at, it's killing people. Stoning is certainly not the most efficient way to kill, but it does have a couple of advantages over most other forms of public execution. First, stoning enables the entire community to participate in the killing. Second, stoning allows the individual to exonerate himself. Everyone throws a rock, so everyone participates. But the individual is allowed to tell himself, "It wasn't me who killed. I just threw one rock." In other words, stoning is a way for the community to participate in collective murder and lie to itself about it. And there you have it. Collective murder and the lies we tell ourselves about it. This is the context for what Jesus has to say about truth and freedom. In talking about truth and freedom, Jesus was addressing the Jews who had believed in him, John 8:31. Presumably, these are Judeans who had recently come to believe that Jesus was the Messiah. Jesus' ministry had been primarily in Galilee, but now Judeans from the capital city of Jerusalem were beginning to believe in the prophet from Nazareth. These new would-be disciples had come to believe that Jesus was indeed the Messiah, Israel's true king. But Jesus appeared to have been somewhat skeptical of their belief, for he said to them, "If you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." John 8:31-32. Jesus was essentially saying, well, it's great that you've signed up with me to be my disciples and all, but if you stick with what I've been teaching, it will open up your eyes to some things that you need to be set free from. In the background of this conversation were conflicting ideas of what it meant to be the Jewish Messiah. Was Jesus going to lead them in their war of independence and start killing Romans to get rid of taxation without representation? Or was he up to something else? How did these newbie disciples of Jesus respond to what Jesus said about truth and freedom? Not so well. They answered him, "We are descendants of Abraham and have never been slaves to anyone. What do you mean by saying, 'You will be made free'?" John 8:33. Uh-oh. These brand new disciples were already off on the wrong foot with Jesus. As soon as Jesus brought up the subject of freedom, they said, "I'm proud to be an Israelite, where at least I know I'm free," or something like that. Jesus said to the would-be disciples, "You need to be set free." The would-be disciples retorted, "We are free." Obviously, they were not on the same page. And by the time the whole scenario played out, the crowd was so offended at Jesus that they sought to stone him. So much for being Jesus' disciples. It should be readily apparent that the truth that Jesus wanted these Judeans to see was no conventional truth of generic platitude. The truth Jesus was talking about in John 8 was so controversial that it incited the crowd first to insult and finally to violence. For the Judean crowd gathering around Jesus, freedom was something primarily political. Their essential idea of freedom was that it was a form of power, especially power over and against national enemies. To come straight out and say it, freedom was a euphemism for lethal power, the power to kill. When you had power to kill your enemies and the will to do so, you were free. When you had the biggest, most well-trained, best equipped, most lethal military, then you were free. But it's not freedom in the form of lethal power that Jesus sees as true freedom. For Jesus, freedom is liberation from sin, especially the particular sin of collective killing. Do you think I'm overarching to make this point? Am I inserting my own ideas into the text? Have I arbitrarily identified collective killing as the sin Jesus was talking about in John 8? Hardly. Listen to what Jesus said to the Judeans in response to their protest that they are freedom-loving children of Abraham. And notice how Jesus brings up the issue of killing. I know you are descendants of Abraham, yet you look for an opportunity to kill me because there is no place in you for my word. John 8:37. This was quite shocking. Jesus had just told a group of prospective disciples that they were actually looking for an opportunity to kill him. Why? Because collective killing is the sin Jesus told the crowd they were enslaved to and needed to be set free from. Think about that. If the crowd had taken in Jesus' words, they would have understood that killing is incompatible with the way Jesus was leading them. Jesus knew that what lies at the foundation of the crowd's understanding of freedom was violence and murder. For the crowd, freedom was just another word for having the power to kill their enemies. The crowd said, "We're talking about freedom." But Jesus said, "No, you're talking about killing." Jesus was unmasking what lay behind the crowd's euphemistic use of words like freedom. Jesus was telling them a truth about themselves that had long been hidden from them, a truth they really don't want to know. Jesus also understood that in revealing this truth to the crowd, he would become their enemy and they would seek to kill him. And what happened? By the end of the chapter, the crowd was seeking to stone Jesus. 6 months later, they cried out for his crucifixion. It's not a popular truth that Jesus was offering, but if you can receive it, it will set you free. The truth that Jesus was trying to show the nationalistic crowd of Judean disciples, is that freedom attained and maintained by killing is another name for slavery. I read that again. The truth that Jesus was trying to show the nationalistic crowd of Judean disciples is that freedom attained and maintained by killing is another name for slavery. Let that sink in. What they think makes them free actually enslaves them. They are slaves to their practice of collective killing for the sake of power, and they self-deceptively call it freedom. For the crowd, freedom was just another word for killing. For Jesus, freedom was another word for love. Obviously, they were going to be at odds. Here's the question. Is freedom just another word for the power to kill? Or is freedom just another word for the choice to love? Again, do you think I'm reading this matter of killing into the text? Not at all. Let's continue with John's gospel text. They answered him, "Abraham is our father." Jesus said to them, "If you were Abraham's children, you would be doing what Abraham did. But now you are trying to kill me, a man who has told you the truth that I heard from God. This is not what Abraham did." John 8:39-40. Notice how Jesus kept turning the conversation to the subject of killing. Yes, it is an unpleasant subject, but we need to trust that Jesus knew what he was doing. He was trying to set us free. When the crowd again asserted that they were the children of Abraham, Jesus dismissed their claim by saying that if they were really Abraham's children, they would not be trying to kill him. Jesus then pointedly said, "This is not what Abraham did." Let's pause for a moment and ask ourselves, what did Abraham do? We know that Abraham heard the call of God, left the city of Ur, journeyed to a promised land, and by faith, fathered a family in his old age. That is all part of Abraham's story. But Jesus was talking specifically about killing. What did Abraham do that Jesus was calling the crowd to imitate in regard to killing? The answer is plain and simple. Abraham put down the knife. Abraham did not kill his son Isaac upon the sacrificial altar at Moriah. Abraham abandoned the sacred violence of human sacrifice. Abraham put down the knife. This is a big deal. We need to be careful not to read the story of the sacrifice of Isaac in an anachronistic way. As modern people, we are scandalized by the idea that God would ask a father to sacrifice his son. We see it as utterly abhorrent. But Abraham's contemporaries, especially his Canaanite neighbors, would not have seen it as scandalous or abhorrent. The sacrifice of children, especially firstborn sons, was what the gods required. This was just part of the quid pro quo arrangement between humans and the gods. The firstborn would be offered to the gods to ensure future fertility, a sacrifice of blood to secure blessing. A Canaanite contemporary of Abraham may have seen a tragic irony in an old man being asked by the gods to sacrifice his long-awaited son, but they would have not seen it as scandalous. The gods can be cruel, and they're not to be trifled with. But what did Abraham think about it? It's impossible to say. We can't crawl inside Abraham's psyche. All we know is that Abraham journeyed 3 days to Moriah to offer his son Isaac as a burnt offering, all the while maintaining some kind of trust in his mysterious and newly discovered God. Abraham was making discoveries about the nature of the divine that would in time change the whole trajectory of religion. The episode of Moriah, what Christians call the sacrifice of Isaac, and what Jews more accurately call the binding of Isaac, the Akedah, is the subject of much rich and varied interpretation. But one important way of understanding the Akedah is that it is Abraham gaining the revelation that God does not want human sacrifice. This is a new trajectory for worship. At Moriah, human sacrifice met its Waterloo, at least as a right for what will become the Hebrew people. If Abraham is the father of monotheism, Abraham is also the father of the abolition of human sacrifice. When Abraham laid down the knife on Moriah and offered a ram instead of his son, humanity took a huge step in the right direction. 1,000 years later, the Hebrew prophet Hosea would announce that God does not desire sacrifice at all, something Jesus twice affirmed. See Hosea 6:6, Matthew 9:13, and Matthew 12:7. In other words, Abraham abandoned the idea of killing in the name of God. This is what Jesus was talking about. This is what Abraham did. This is why Jesus told the crowd that if they were truly Abraham's children, they would do what Abraham did and not seek to kill in the name of God. I got to read that again. This is why Jesus told the crowd that if they were truly Abraham's children, they would do what Abraham did and not seek to kill in the name of God. Amen. Jesus, have mercy on us. Yet Jesus and the Judean disciples were quickly arriving at an impasse. The real problem was that Jesus and the Judeans had such divergent ideas about God. Their ideas about God were so divergent that they were really two different beings. One was the Abba of Jesus. The other is the Satan. Jesus said to the Judeans, "I speak of what I have seen with my Father, and you do what you have heard from your father." John 8:38 ESV. The father of Jesus is a preserver of life. The father of the crowd is a killer. Jesus was desperately trying to show them that God was not as they had imagined him. God is not a killer demanding blood sacrifices. God is not a war deity sanctioning the slaughter of enemies. The freedom that comes from God is not power to kill, but the choice to love. For Jesus, freedom is another word for what Abraham did when he laid down the knife and chose not to kill his son. Now Jesus was ready to unleash the hard truth that could set them free. You are indeed doing what your father does. They said to him, "We are not illegitimate children. We have one Father, God himself." Jesus said to them, "If God were your Father, you would love me, for I came from God and now I am here. I did not come on my own, but he sent me. John 8:41-42. Jesus understood that he had been sent by his Father, the true and living God, to liberate humanity from false ideas about God, including the lie that God wants or sanctions killing of any kind. But for the most part, even would-be disciples were not willing to engage in a wholesale re-evaluation of God if it undermined the basic foundation of the world. We can almost hear the frustration in Jesus' voice when he said to his hearers, "Why do you not understand what I say? It is because you cannot bear to hear my word." John 8:43 ESV. We really do not want to hear that God is calling us to rethink what it means to be free. In his debate with the Judeans, Jesus constantly juxtaposed love and killing and showed that only one correlates with true freedom. But we can hardly bear to hear that freedom can never be achieved by killing our enemies. It flies in the face of everything we've been taught to honor and cherish. Jesus knows that most of the time, most people cannot bear to be told that killing in the name of freedom is just another word for being a slave to systemic sin. At this point, some readers are quite likely to close this book and never open it again. But I hope you will press on. The crowd's response to what Jesus was saying was to insinuate a vulgar insult. We are not illegitimate children. That is their thinly disguised way of saying, we've heard about the questionable circumstances of your birth, but we're not bastards like some around here. Things were starting to get ugly. Remember, these were people who a bit earlier had professed they wanted to be disciples of Jesus, and now they were calling their rabbi ugly names. At last, Jesus dared to speak the whole truth and let the chips fall where they may. You are from your father, the devil, and you choose to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks according to his own nature, for he is a liar and the father of lies. But because I tell you the truth, you do not believe me. John 8:44-45. Now we are getting to the heart of the matter. Jesus was pulling back the curtain on dark things hidden from the foundation of the world. Jesus boldly told the Judeans that in holding to a false, violence-based freedom instead of true, love-based freedom, they were of their father, the devil. They were not children of Abraham or children of God. They were, sadly, children of the devil. Hard words. Jesus submitted as conclusive evidence for their relationship to the devil their snare in their dark father's desire to kill and lie about it. Jesus described the devil, the author of false religion, as a murderer from the beginning and the father of lies. But how was the devil a murderer from the beginning? What beginning was Jesus talking about? Obviously, it is the beginning of murder itself, which is also the beginning of human civilization. We're again back at the Cain and Abel story. The Satan was present in the Cain and Abel story, stirring up rivalry and accusation, instigating violence and murder, and lying about it. With satanic ideas crawling around inside his head, Cain thought he couldn't be free unless he imposed his will upon his brother. Cain, the tiller of the ground, could not share the land with his brother, the tender of flocks. Something had to give. Cain had to be free from having to love his brother, free from having to care for his brother, free from having to share the land with his brother. Doing the will of his satanic father, Cain reclassified his brother as an enemy. Cain killed Abel. Cain lied to himself about it. Then Cain went forth with hands full of blood and a head full of lies to found human civilization. The pattern was established. When competition arises with our neighbors, we will call them enemies, kill them, and tell ourselves lies about it. We will justify our killing in the name of freedom and hide the bodies behind myths and monuments, anthems and altars. We will tell ourselves the lie, we are not our brother's keepers. They are not our brothers. They are not us. They are them. They are enemies. For the sake of our rights, our land, our nation, our honor, our security, our freedom, they had to be killed. And we sing, I'm proud to be a, fill in the blank, where at least I know I'm free. And then we make the grand pronouncement, God bless the USA, or the Pax Romana, or the Bar Kokhba revolt. And we do it all in the name of freedom. Except Jesus says that kind of freedom comes from the father of lies. It's this satanic freedom that Jesus wants to set us free from. As you can see, the crowd did not attempt to stone Jesus for positing generic platitudes about nebulous truth and freedom. The crowd wanted to stone Jesus for pulling back the covers on their dark tryst with the devil. Which of you convicts me of sin? If I tell you the truth, why do you not believe me? Whoever is from God hears the words of God. The reason you do not hear them is that you are not from God. John 8:46-47. Jesus began this discourse by saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Jesus is completely free from the darkness of the Cain system of collective murder and the lies we tell ourselves about it. As the light of the world, Jesus shines the light of truth on the dark system of violence that lies at the foundation of the world. Unlike most of us, Jesus is not implicated in the human system of violence. Jesus is untainted by the legacy of Cain's city. Actually, the only way to be fully free from complicity in our systems of violence is to embrace a radical prophetic poverty, the kind we find in the saintly lives of those like Saint Francis and Mother Teresa. Admittedly, most of us cannot fully emulate their radical poverty, but it is from such lives that light shines on our dark foundations. This light enables us to at least recognize our complicity in violence and to seek a better way. Jesus, as the light of the world, is completely innocent of all complicity with systemic sin, so much so that he boldly asked, which of you convicts me of sin? Jesus cannot be indicted in the systems of foundational murder and the accompanying self-deception. But this very thing guaranteed Jesus would become a victim of the system. Violence cannot tolerate the presence of one who owes it nothing. It's why everyone at a stoning needs to throw a rock. If someone at a stoning doesn't participate, they are in danger of becoming the next victim. For the illusion of innocence to work, everyone must participate in the collective murder. The one who won't throw a rock becomes a prophet shining light on the evil of stoning. The community must then either repent or stone the prophet. On his final visit to Jerusalem, Jesus lamented, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. Matthew 23:37. Of course, in the end, Jesus was also killed. But his death is what shames the whole system of redemptive violence. We come to realize that in using violence as a means of achieving justice, we are capable of murdering God. The whole evil system is dragged into the light and exposed for what it is. Seen in the light of the resurrection, the crucifixion of Jesus demands that we once and for all renounce violence as a means of achieving just ends. The Jews answered him, "Are we not right in saying that you are a Samaritan and have a demon?" John 8:48. Now all pretense of civil discourse had been abandoned. These Judeans were decidedly not going to become disciples of Jesus. In their rage, they leveled two accusations at Jesus. Revealingly, they accused Jesus of belonging to a despised ethnic minority, and ironically, they accused Jesus of having a demon. These erstwhile disciples had returned to the dead-end cul-de-sac of hatred and hostility. They were slinking back into the very darkness that Jesus tried to rescue them from. In accusing Jesus of having a demon, they unwittingly revealed that they were the ones under demonic sway. Instead of embracing the truth that would set them free, the Judeans consoled themselves in the chains of racism and witch hunts. Jesus concluded his debate with the failed Judean disciples by speaking of Abraham, in whom they took such national pride. Your ancestor Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. He saw it and was glad. Then the Jews said to him, "You are not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham?" Jesus said to them, "Very truly, I tell you, before Abraham was, I am." So they picked up stones to throw at him. But Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. John 8:56-59. For the second time that day, the stones of execution were ready to fly. Indeed, an angry crowd is the most dangerous thing in the world. What finally sent the crowd over the edge was Jesus' claim that he was what Abraham was looking for. Abraham was looking for a city not built by Cain. Abraham was looking for a city whose architect was God. Abraham was looking for a way out of the vicious cycle of reciprocal violence, masquerading under the guise of freedom. Abraham was looking for a way of structuring human civilization that came not from the Satan, but from the eternal I am. What Abraham was looking for, and by faith had caught a fleeting glimpse of, was what Jesus was bringing. Jesus was bringing the reign and rule of God, where freedom would not be a where freedom would not be a cover for killing, but an expression of self-giving love. When your city is built upon violence, freedom is just another word for killing your brother. But when your city is built upon love, freedom is just another word for being your brother's keeper. Jesus brings us the truth that will set us free. The truth is that God is love and light. The truth is that our enemies are really our alienated brothers. The truth is there is no them. There is only us. The truth is that freedom is love, not power. The truth is there is another way to arrange human civilization than what we have known. The truth is that the way of war is a lie. It comes from the father of lies, the father of murder. James Carroll, in his important book, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, asks this penetrating question. War is a given fact of the human condition. But is it true? The traditional narrative suggests that the solution to violence is more violence. Not only that, but violence as a source of meaning and valor. Violence can be sanctified as sacrifice and atonement as the will of God. But is that true? Jesus answers Carol's question with an emphatic no. It's not true. It's a lie. War does not have to be a given fact. Violence does not have to be the source of meaning and valor. Violence is not the will of God. Jesus is unambiguous in his renunciation of the lie that true freedom can be attained by violence. Jesus offers us his truth to save us from Satan's hideous lie. But we must have the courage to step out of the false security of the darkness and into the liberating light of freedom redefined. The truth is, God is love, and our enemies are our brothers. Freedom is just another word for what happens to us when we live in the light of that truth. Do we have the courage to embrace the truth that will set us free? Or would we rather keep throwing rocks at those who tell us that the way of war and violence is a lie that keeps us enslaved to sin and Satan? If we carefully examine how we use the word freedom, it becomes apparent that we use it to sanction our perceived right to pursue happiness in a self-interested fashion. We want the freedom to arrange the world in such a way that it serves the interests of our own self or our own group. But that is not freedom. That is the way to slavery and self-destruction. More than a century ago, Fyodor Dostoevsky saw through the self-deceptive way we use the word freedom when he wrote, "The world has proclaimed freedom, especially of late. But what do we see in this freedom of theirs? Only slavery and suicide. For the world says, you have needs, therefore satisfy them. For you have the same rights as the noblest and richest men. Do not be afraid to satisfy them, but even increase them." This is the current teaching of the world, and in this they see freedom. But what comes of this right to increase one's needs? For the rich, isolation and spiritual suicide. For the poor, envy and murder. And no wonder that instead of freedom, they have fallen into slavery. Dostoevsky is simply echoing what Jesus said long before him. Freedom cannot be attained by fighting for our rights. That is the way to slavery and suicide. It's the long road out of Eden that always leads us away from God. As Rowan Williams has said, what makes us secure in the world's terms is the enemy of the transcendent God. Security in the world's terms is a false security. Making ourselves an enemy of the God who is love and light is why we keep finding our way back to the man-made hells of violence inflicted in the name of somebody's freedom. As long as we keep telling ourselves that the only way forward in history is to fight yet another war in the name of freedom, we find our roads circling back into the same old hellholes that Jesus seeks to lead us out of. David Bentley Hart put it this way: hell is the name of that false history against which the true story in Christ is told, and it is exposed as the true destination of all our violence. Violence in the name of freedom always circles back to hell. Jesus is the way out. In the midst of our sanctioned practice of collective killing done in the name of freedom, Jesus comes and speaks the truth that will set us free. Or as Jesus said, if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed. John 8:36. Do we really believe in the way of freedom offered to us by the Son of God? Do you really think the only way to bring about the peace is to sacrifice your children and kill all your enemies? Larry Norman. Not long ago, I was in Istanbul, Turkey. While there, I toured the Topkapi Palace, the former royal palace of the Ottoman sultans and center of the Ottoman Empire. Among the many artifacts collected throughout the centuries and on display was an item I found quite remarkable: the sword of the Prophet Muhammad. There, under protective glass and illuminated by high-tech lighting, was the 1,400-year-old sword of the founder of Islam. As I looked at the sword with its curved handle and jeweled scabbard, I thought how significant it is that no one will ever visit a museum and be shown a weapon that belonged to Jesus. Jesus brings freedom to the world in a way different from Pharaoh, Alexander, Caesar, Muhammad, Napoleon, and Patton. Jesus sets us free not by killing enemies, but by being killed by enemies and forgiving them, by whom I mean us. Forgiveness and co-suffering love is the truth that sets us free from the false freedom inflicted by swords ancient and modern. Muhammad could fight a war in the name of freedom to liberate his followers from Meccan oppression. But Jesus had a radically different understanding of freedom. Unless this sounds like crass Christian triumphalism, my real question is this: do we Christians secretly wish that Jesus were more like Muhammad? It's not an idle question. The moment the church took to the Crusades in order to fight Muslims, it had already surrendered its vision of Jesus to the model of Muhammad. Muhammad may have thought freedom could be found at the end of a sword, but Jesus never did. So are Christians who most enthusiastically support U.S.-led wars against Muslim nations actually trying to turn Jesus into some version of Muhammad? It's a serious question. It's a serious question because freedom is just another word for what? I'm reading the books that have been most helpful to me in my personal, spiritual, and theological journey so that their messages can be spread far and wide to help others. If you are enjoying and being blessed by the works of these amazing authors, please consider, if you are able, purchasing a copy of your own and giving it to someone else to read so that the blessing of Jesus and his grace is spread even further through your gift and partnership in God's work. Thank you.